Hey mathematicians! Today we're going to start with notes 1.1 talking about number sense. So the goal today for you is I can compute with positive and negative numbers. Now this may seem too easy, I get that, but before we jump into that harder algebra stuff, we need to have those basics down really solid in our minds. So we're going to just do a quick overview of that. And then if you do ever have a problem or forget, this is a nice little guide or table to help you out. So let's jump right in. Adding and subtracting positive and negative numbers. If I give you a problem where you're adding a positive number plus a positive number, the result is always going to be positive. And an example of that would be something like 5 plus 3. And I know these problems are super easy. That's okay. We like easy examples to start off with. We'll get harder. Negative plus a negative is always going to be more negative. And an example of that would be negative 6 plus negative 3, making that negative 9. We get more negative. Then we have negative minus a positive. So negative 8 minus 3. Because it's a negative and a negative, it's kind of the same thing we just did here. And in fact, that's going to get more negative. So negative 8 minus 3 is negative 11. Notice I could rewrite this problem the same as negative 8 plus a negative 3, and then it would turn it into the problem above. Very similar. Positive minus a negative. Notice the big key here is those negatives are going to cancel each other out. So we're actually going to end up being positive in this case. So 4 minus negative 3 is the same thing as 4 plus positive 3, because those are always going to cancel each other out. So 4 plus 3 is 7. We have a positive answer. The only tricky one we're going to run into in these simple problems is a negative minus a negative. And that's actually going to be a variable result. And why is that? Well, negative 7 minus negative 5. When these cancel, we get negative 7 plus positive 5, which is negative 2. Because that second number was smaller, it wasn't big enough to get us out of the negative number range. However, when this number is larger, that second one, it is large enough to get us out of that range, and this would be negative 5 plus positive 7, giving us positive 2. So you can write variable, you can write dependent, you can write changes. I'm going to write varies because it varies based on the problem. And then of course I put your little reminder in here. Always simplify any double signs first, then simplify. Remember, our two negatives always cancel each other out and turn into a positive. And then I've got some really simple examples for you to try. You can go ahead and try those. I'm just going to throw some answers down, so if you want to pause the video right away and try them, you can, or you can do it along with me. Negative 5 plus 8, that would be a negative plus a positive, making this positive. This would be negative 2 minus 7, negative minus a positive, negative 9. Negative 3 minus negative 4. Remember, we're going to change that double sign into a positive. Negative 3 plus 4 is going to be 1. Again, I know these are pretty simple, but I want to have these down pat. The next thing I want to look at before we move on is multiplying and dividing those positive and negative numbers. Again, seems really simple, but if we don't have this down in the back of our mind really well, it's going to make all the math we do from here on out a lot harder. So, when we go and take a positive times a positive, that one is obviously going to get more positive. You can't get something out of nothing here. So positive. 3 times 4, positive 12. This one's a little tricky. You'd think positive times positive is a positive, right? So negative times negative is a negative, right? No. This one is actually also a positive. And the reason for that is the same thing as when we are subtracting negative numbers from up above. The negatives actually cancel each other out, negative, negative, and we get positive 15. Negative times a positive, sadly the negativity is going to win out on this one, and if we have one negative sign, that one's going to win. So negative 3 times 2 is going to be a negative 6. The same thing happens when we have a positive times a negative. You're like, well, is it any different from the last problem? No, it's not. It just shows that no matter what order they're written in, it's going to be the same. Now, that's not the case with addition and subtraction, because it does matter if the bigger number is in front or behind up there. But in this case, no. The negative still wins out, and we still have negative 6. And that should be the case because we know that if we flip the numbers around, we're still going to get the same answer. Now we're going to jump into those division problems. So positive divided by a positive, that one's easy. Positive, you can't make something negative if there's no negatives there. 18 divided by 3 is a positive 6. Negative divided by a negative, you're like, yeah, this is the one. It's going to follow the same pattern. Nope. It's actually going to follow the pattern from up above. This one's going to be positive. Again, they cancel each other out. Negative 18 divided by negative 3 is positive 6. I know, it's a little tricky. A negative divided by a positive, again, that negative's going to win out. And again, negative 18 divided by 3, negative 6. When we have a positive divided by a negative, unfortunately that negative still wins out. Just like that. Multiplying and dividing actually makes a little bit more sense once you see why it's the case, because turning those numbers around doesn't actually matter. I actually think the hardest one on this page is the variable one, because you really have to pay attention to that second number, and that can give a few of us a little bit of a trick, a hard time. All right, let's jump down here again. Positive times a negative. I immediately know I can put a negative sign down. 2 times 3 is 6. Some of you may prefer to do the whole problem. If that's too much for you right now, take it in steps. Do the signs first and then deal with the numbers. So for me, a negative times a negative is going to be a positive, and I'm just not going to write the negative sign because I know it's going to be positive. 6 times 7 is 42, so negative 6 times negative 7 is 42. I broke that down into a smaller step for those of you who need it. For those of you who don't, you can do the whole problem. Negative 21 divided by negative 3, boom, you right away know it's positive 7. If that works for you, great. If it doesn't, take the slower route. Positive divided by negative. That's going to be a negative. 16 divided by 4 is a 4. Again, I know this was review. That is okay. It is okay to review those skills because we always want to be sharpening them and preparing them so that when we have to do the harder skills, this comes naturally.